Hey there, survivors. Thanks for tuning in to tonight's episode. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. It really helps me keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now let's get started. I've never liked silence. Not real silence. The kind that settles in after something's gone horribly wrong. It's not peaceful. It's empty. Like the world suddenly forgot it's supposed to keep spinning. That silence is what I remember most when I think back to those first hours. Not the screams. Not even the dead. Just how quiet everything became after the noise finally stopped. If you're hearing this, it means I've made it through the first 55 hours. I don't know what comes next, but I need to tell this while it's still fresh. My name is Leo Reyes. I'm 16 years old, sophomore year. I go to Roosevelt High School in Jefferson Park, on the northwest side of Chicago. And this is how I survived. The weird part is, everything felt normal at first. Cold for April, low 40s, grey skies. I remember I was mad that morning because I'd left my heavier hoodie at home and had to wear the thin school-branded one that never really kept out the wind. I got to first period late. No surprise there. Pellegrino gave me his usual raised eyebrow look but didn't say anything. It was a Thursday, supposed to be easy. I had robotics after school and was planning to stay late to finish some gear calibration I'd messed up earlier in the week. That little mistake is probably the only reason I'm still alive. There had already been some talk about disturbances downtown that morning. Something about people fighting on the Red Line. Then rumors of a shooting in the Loop. Nothing confirmed. Most of the teachers brushed it off like they always did. I remember hearing Coach Simmons joke that the city's always on fire, and it's probably just another Twitter hoax. But by lunch, the news alerts started flooding in. Outbreaks in multiple neighborhoods, emergency crews being overwhelmed, and citywide curfews being considered. The school didn't close, but you could feel the tension. Parents started showing up. Not just one or two, whole families. By 1 p.m., the front office had turned into a holding area. People were showing up from nearby apartment complexes, businesses, and transit stops, looking for safety, not answers. One of the counselors told me the park district across the street had tried to open as a shelter, but it got overwhelmed in less than 20 minutes. So now they were sending people here. Roosevelt High wasn't just a school anymore. It had become a fallback shelter for anyone in Jefferson Park who had nowhere else to go. By the time 6th period ended, the gym was full. Families with duffel bags, crying babies, people wrapped in emergency blankets. The air smelled like sweat, damp coats, and fear. And it wasn't just the refugees. The gym was already scheduled for a late-night basketball showcase. Our junior varsity team had an after-hours scrimmage against a visiting team from Niles. Nothing big, just a pre-season warm-up. But that meant coaches, players, parents, and even a couple teachers were still hanging around. I saw Coach Evans hauling Gatorade packs into the locker room. Miss Tanaka, the gym supervisor, was taking calls and telling people it was fine. Just stay calm. No one was in danger. A few local cops were outside in their cruisers. No National Guard yet. No FEMA. Just local officers trying to keep traffic from clogging up Milwaukee Avenue. Downstairs in the robotics lab, I wasn't thinking about any of that. I was trying to fix a torque issue on a jointed arm. The whole school Wi-Fi had gone flaky, and I thought nothing of it. Happens all the time when the heating kicks in too strong. But then, my phone lost all service. I checked the bars. Nothing. No LTE, no signal, not even the emergency SOS icon. Just a dead zone. I tried restarting it twice before giving up. Figured I'd go upstairs and ask Mr. Chang if the school servers were down. That's when I heard the first crash. Not close. Somewhere on the floor above. A sudden slam of something metal, maybe a bench or locker. It wasn't panic-inducing yet. Schools make noise, even after hours. People drop things. Janitors move carts. But it happened again, louder. Then the fire alarm stuttered. Just one sharp beep, and then nothing. No full activation. That's what made it feel wrong. A glitch, not a drill. I climbed the stairs to the main level and walked toward the cafeteria corridor. The air felt stale. Lights were still on, casting that washed-out glow across the linoleum. I passed the nurse's office. Door locked, blinds down. Nobody inside. The trophy case near the library had a crack across the glass that hadn't been there before. Something had hit it hard. Around the corner near the cafeteria, the hallway changed. Papers scattered, someone's backpack torn open. One of the vending machines was tipped forward, its contents spilled in a crushed mess on the tile. But no people. I looked toward the double doors that led to the gym. I could still hear voices coming from there, coaches yelling, a whistle. One of the teams must have still been practicing, completely unaware. I was about to go check when I saw the blood. Not a pool, not like in the movies, just thin streaks, smears, like someone had fallen and tried to pull themselves forward. There were handprints near the lockers. One shoe, just one, left lying sideways with the lace torn. I froze, tried to tell myself it was just a fight. Maybe someone fell down the stairs and hit their head, but my legs were already moving backward. That's when the screaming started. It came from the far end of the hallway, fast, high-pitched, a teenage voice, breaking with terror, then another, more urgent. Running footsteps. Something slammed against a locker. A boy burst around the corner. JV jersey, missing a shoe, face pale like he'd seen a ghost. He didn't stop when he saw me, just screamed, "They're biting people," and kept running toward the exit doors near the art wing. I wanted to follow, but then someone else appeared. It was a woman, maybe mid-40s, dark jeans, grey coat, one sleeve torn completely open. She was limping. At first I thought she was injured. Then I saw how she moved. Not like someone hurt, like someone broken from the inside out. Her steps didn't match her arms. She dragged one foot, her neck was bent wrong, and her eyes, those didn't look like anything human. I backed away, still holding my bag, not even realizing my hands were shaking. She moved faster than I expected, not fast like a runner, but enough to make me flinch when she jerked forward. I turned and ran. I didn't think. I just moved. Past the classrooms, past the second stairwell, down into the old science wing where they store the extra furniture. The door to the old chemistry lab was open. I ducked inside and slammed it shut, flipping the lock. The room was dark. I didn't turn on the lights. I stayed near the floor, behind a desk, holding my breath. My heart felt like it wanted to crawl up my throat and hide. Footsteps passed by in the hallway, slow, uneven. Then another set, and another. I heard something groan, low, rattling, like it came from someone whose voice had forgotten how to work. At one point, someone banged on a locker hard enough to dent the metal. I stayed there for almost an hour, too afraid to move, too numb to cry. When I finally left the lab, the halls were different. Trash everywhere. One of the teachers' carts overturned. Lockers left wide open. And worse, bodies. Not all dead. Some were just lying there, breathing shallow. Others were changed. Their skin had gone pale and tight. Blood pooled beneath them like someone had forgotten how to stop leaking. But they didn't move. Not yet. I made my way to the nurse's office, remembering it had a manual lock and first aid gear. I used my maintenance keycard from robotics to get in. It worked. Inside was quiet. Too quiet. I blocked the door with a filing cabinet and started going through drawers. Found gauze, bottled water, antiseptic, some crackers. No phone, no emergency radio. The landline was dead. I checked the hallway again. Nobody in sight. That's where I stayed the rest of the night. I kept the lights off. Sat on the cot in the back with my hoodie wrapped around my face, trying to stay awake. Outside, I could still hear movement. Feet dragging, the occasional thud, a voice here and there that didn't sound right. Sometime after midnight, I heard a child crying in the gym. A sharp sound, cut off too fast. I didn't go check. Sometime between 4 and 5 in the morning, the sounds faded. I don't mean they stopped completely, just that they got more distant. I peeked through the blinds of the hallway window, barely lifting one corner with my finger. There was something in the stillness that didn't belong. I didn't see anyone, but the feeling you get after a fight has already happened. That thick, heavy quiet was everywhere. Nothing moved. No announcements. No alarms. The power was still on, but it didn't comfort me. It just made everything feel like it was trying too hard to pretend things were normal. I unblocked the door after sunrise, carefully, slowly. The hallway was brighter now. Pale light filtered through the reinforced windows above the lockers, casting long shadows that reached like fingers across the floor. The air was cold and smelled like bleach, mold, and something underneath it all. Something rotten. I stepped out, holding the trauma scissors like they meant anything, and walked toward the main office. My legs felt stiff, but I kept moving. I hadn't eaten since lunch the day before. My stomach growled loud enough to echo off the walls. Near the admin hallway, the damage was worse. Chairs overturned. Someone had barricaded the double doors with a water cooler and 2 desks, but it had been pushed aside, violently. There were smears of dried blood along the floor, handprints trailing toward the front lobby. I passed 2 bodies slumped against the wall. A woman, maybe late 30s, and a boy in a Roosevelt hoodie, probably a student. Their faces were gone. I didn't stop to look closely. I didn't want to know if I recognized him. The front office was shattered. One of the windows had been broken from the inside. A chair was still sticking halfway through the glass. Paperwork and files were scattered everywhere, fluttering gently from the ceiling vents. The landline phone was off the hook, a dial tone humming softly until it finally went dead. I checked the security monitor display. It was cracked, but still powered on. Half the camera feeds were down. The gym feed was stuck on a frozen frame, metal bleachers, turned over tables, and something dark spilled across the center court. No people, no movement. I found a half-eaten protein bar and a bottle of cranberry juice in the staff fridge, took both, sat on the floor next to the locked supply closet and ate in silence. 1 bite at a time, like it might be the last thing I ever tasted. Every creak in the walls made me flinch. I kept waiting to hear someone yell, a cop, a teacher, another student. But the building didn't offer anything back, just silence and the buzz of dying lights. I knew I couldn't stay in the nurse's office forever. No food, no communication, no way out. If the infection had spread outside, and I was starting to believe it had, then rescue wasn't coming. I needed a better plan. First goal, get higher. See if I could reach the 3rd floor and look outside from the top science wing. From there, I could get a better view of the surrounding neighborhood, maybe even check if the police station on Higgins was still standing. I moved slowly up the south stairwell, one hand on the railing, listening carefully before every corner. On the 2nd floor landing, I saw 2 bodies lying at the base of the lockers, an adult and a student. Neither moved. Their skin had already begun to go grey, the flesh around the mouths discolored and swollen. I forced myself not to look at their faces as I stepped around them. Their smell hung in the air, thick and bitter like spoiled milk and pennies. The 3rd floor was mostly untouched. It was the newest wing of the school, built in 2015 after the district got a renovation grant. Wide halls, clean walls, better doors. I walked toward the back science rooms and looked through each one. All empty. Then, in room 319, I finally found a window with a view. What I saw outside nearly dropped me to my knees. Jefferson Park was in ruins. Smoke rose from behind the transit center. Several blocks of Milwaukee Avenue were littered with abandoned cars, some with doors open, others smashed or burned. The intersection near the gas station was blocked off by a pile of debris, shopping carts, fencing, even what looked like a flipped city vehicle. I could barely make out movement down by the Park District building, slow figures wandering between the trees and the empty field. No vehicles, no police, no rescue effort. Just the quiet sprawl of a city that had been told to stay indoors and lock the doors, but now had no one left to give the order. I tried to open the window. Locked. Of course it was. Modern security glass, no easy latch. I figured even if I smashed it, I'd never fit through without slicing myself to ribbons. I backed away and turned toward the hallway, still holding those trauma scissors in one hand and a pocket flashlight I found in the lab drawer. That's when I heard the first real sign of life. Voices. Down the hall, maybe 2 or 3 classrooms away. Muffled, but human. A man and a woman. Urgent, but not screaming. I followed the sound. Every step slow. Each door I passed threatening to burst open. When I reached room 325, I heard the voices more clearly. Someone was arguing. About supplies. about waiting for help. The door had been barricaded from the inside using desks and filing cabinets. Through the narrow rectangular window, I saw at least 4 people, 2 adults, one in a coach's polo. The other might have been a teacher, a student too, maybe more behind the desk rows. I knocked once, then again. It's Leo Reyes, robotics team. I was downstairs. There was silence inside. Someone approached the door, peered through the glass, then walked away. A voice called out, "We're not opening this, not anymore." I pressed my face to the glass. I'm not infected. I've been alone since yesterday. We said we're not opening it. The voice was firm. A man, probably the coach. We let someone in earlier. She was bit. She didn't say anything. Turned on us while we were sleeping. Nearly killed Andy. We're not doing that again. I stepped back from the door. I understood. I didn't like it, but I understood. They were scared. So was I. The man's tone softened slightly. There's food in the faculty lounge downstairs. Break room fridge. You can still access it through the math wing. It was clear an hour ago. That was all he said. The light behind the window shifted. Someone pulled a cabinet tighter against the entrance. Conversation inside resumed, quieter, more hushed. I turned and walked away. I didn't feel angry, just hollow. I had gone to school with people behind that door, sat in classes with them, ate lunch at the same tables. None of that mattered now. Survival made strangers of all of us. I made my way back down to the second floor, this time cutting through the library and into the math department corridor. The smell hit me before I reached the break room. Acrid, sharp, something burned. When I opened the lounge door, I saw why. The microwave was blackened, the door half open. Someone had tried to heat a metal container and walked away. The whole counter was scorched. Fire must have gone out on its own. There were crumbs everywhere, bottles knocked over, and the fridge was open. Inside, I found string cheese, apples, 2 energy drinks, and a leftover sandwich in foil. I took everything, shoved it into my backpack and left. I didn't want to risk another night in the nurse's office. Too exposed, too vulnerable. Instead, I found a small janitor's closet near the social studies wing with no windows and only one entrance. I dragged a chair and filing cabinet inside and barricaded myself. It was cramped, but it was safer. I ate a third of the sandwich and drank half the energy drink. The rest I saved. I turned off my flashlight to conserve the batteries and sat in the dark, knees drawn up to my chest, listening. Outside, sometime past noon, I heard a different sound. Not voices, not moans, something mechanical. A helicopter, brief, faint, then gone. I never saw it, but it reminded me that something was still out there. Whether it was help or just a final patrol, I didn't know, but I wasn't ready to give up. That night, I made a plan. I would check the roof access ladder above the science wing. If I could get to the top of the building, maybe I could signal for help, or at least find a safe way off campus. I knew it wouldn't be easy. The halls were changing. I could feel it in the way the dead moved, slower during the day, more active when the lights went down. I didn't know why, but I didn't want to be caught walking around after dark again. Before I left the janitor's closet, I thought about my parents again. Not in the abstract. I thought about how it ended with them. My dad works for an energy contractor. He'd been sent out to Nevada the week before for some emergency repair project. My mum teaches elementary school up in Evanston. When the rumors started, those vague reports about infections in other cities, sudden lockdowns, missing persons, she didn't wait. She packed a bag and left to meet up with my dad in Reno. She called me before leaving, said it was just precautionary, that it wouldn't last long. I told her I'd be fine, that I'd stay with Mrs. Phelps, our neighbor. Mrs. Phelps was good to me. She made dinner a few nights, kept the door unlocked when I got out late from robotics or track. But she was in her 70s. When the first violent outbreaks hit the south side and started moving north, she left too, said she was going to stay with her sister in Des Plaines. That was 2 days before this started. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't want them to worry. Besides, it wasn't supposed to be like this. No one thought it would be like this. My only other family, My cousins and an uncle lived in Peoria. Too far. I figured I'd ride it out. It was Chicago. We'd seen everything. We always bounced back. Except this time, we didn't. I left the closet around 10 in the morning. My backpack felt heavier, even though it had less in it. Food was almost gone. The flashlight was dimming. I made my way back toward the science wing, past the old projector room, staying close to the walls and listening at every turn. That's when I heard the gunshot. Just one, loud, close, echoing through the building like a hammer dropped on steel. I dropped to my knees instinctively, heart thudding in my ears. Then I heard screaming. 2 voices, one male, one female. Running footsteps, another shot, a crashing sound. Metal, maybe a filing cabinet or a desk slamming into something. I crept forward, crouched low, and peeked around the corner near the main stairwell. It was chaos. 4 people were trying to hold the second-floor hallway. 2 adults. One was the same coach I'd seen upstairs the day before. The other, a parent, I think. The rest were students, probably seniors, built like athletes. They had makeshift weapons, broom handles, broken chair legs, even a lacrosse stick. They were trying to barricade a group of doors when the infected came through the stairwell behind them. I saw the first one charge. A woman with half her arm missing, jaw slack, eyes pale like fogged-over glass. She didn't stop when they hit her. She didn't even flinch, just kept pushing forward, arms out, like some kind of wind-up thing that had forgotten how to fall. The group fought hard. I could see the desperation in their movements. No hesitation, just wild, frantic survival. One of the seniors drove a broken crutch into an infected man's chest. It barely slowed him down. Another student swung a fire extinguisher and knocked one to the ground, only for 2 more to pile over them a second later. The coach fired his handgun once more, but the sound was deafening in the hallway, and he flinched like it hurt to do it. The bullet went wide. I couldn't help them. I wanted to, but I was unarmed, half-starved, and shaking. I ducked back down the hall and pulled open the nearest locker I could fit inside. Number 213, one of the oversized storage lockers by the media room. I crawled in, knees tucked up, backpack pressed to my chest, and pulled the door shut until it clicked. There were tiny vents in the top that let me breathe, but it was pitch black inside. I could still hear everything. More yelling, a crash, something wet slapping against tile, then a scream, cut short. I sat there, shaking, unable to look away even though there was nothing to see. My hands clutched the scissors in my bag like they mattered. Eventually, the sound stopped. Not quickly, not all at once. The kind of stopping that happens when people run out of energy to scream, and what's left doesn't make noise anymore. What followed was worse. Silence, for hours. Not total silence. I heard the infected moving, shuffling, sniffing the air, breathing in wet, slow rattles. At one point, something slammed into the locker next to mine, hard enough to make the metal shudder. I covered my mouth and leaned back, trying to stay still. Time stopped meaning anything. I counted to 200, then again, then again. At some point, I lost track. I tried not to think about what was right outside. I tried not to imagine them sniffing around, blank-eyed, pressing their broken fingers to the lockers. I tried not to think about what would happen if one of them remembered how to work a latch. I just sat there, knees hurting, back cramping, sweat running down my neck, praying for them to move on. But they didn't. That's the thing about these things. Whatever they are, they don't give up, they don't forget, they don't get bored. If they think something is close, they wait, they circle, they linger. It's like some old part of the brain took over, just hunger and direction. They don't knock on doors, they don't whisper, but they know when something is alive. Hours passed. My legs went numb. My back ached from the awkward position. I stopped sweating and started shivering. I thought about texting my mum, even though I knew there was no signal. I opened the screen anyway, just to stare at it. 1% battery. No service. No hope. Eventually, I heard something else. A different kind of movement. Rapid footsteps. Someone running. Hard soles slapping the tile. The infected responded immediately. Groans rose, movement stirred, and several pairs of feet stumbled away from the lockers toward the sound. Whoever it was, they were drawing the crowd with them, and fast. A door slammed shut in the distance, then silence again. I waited another 20 minutes before trying to move. My legs felt like rubber when I opened the locker and crawled out. I collapsed on the floor for a second, then forced myself to crawl toward the nearby classroom. I slipped inside, shut the door behind me, and slid down into the corner, breathing through clenched teeth. That was when I finally let myself cry. Not loud, just quiet. Not because I was sad, not exactly. It was the weight of it, the knowledge that no one was coming, that I wasn't just stuck. I was surviving alone in a place filled with things that used to be people. I stayed in that classroom until dark, ate the last of the sandwich, drank the second energy drink, tried to figure out what to do next. The roof ladder wasn't an option anymore, not with so many infected crowding the stairwell now. I needed a different plan, a safer route. If I could reach the theater or the old equipment loft above the auditorium, maybe I could find an emergency exit or a window with roof access. As night fell, the building changed again. The groans became more frequent. Footsteps dragged louder. I heard glass breaking somewhere near the cafeteria, metal rolling across the floor. One of the infected let out a noise that was almost a word, but not quite. They didn't talk. They didn't scream unless something moved, but they made sounds, sounds that made the hair on my arms rise, because they were close enough to human to fool your brain for half a second. I curled up under the teacher's desk and pulled my hoodie over my face again, trying to imagine I was home. In my room, laptop glowing, rain outside. No monsters, no screaming, just the hum of the ceiling fan and the sound of my mom yelling at me to go to bed. I stayed like that until I couldn't keep my eyes open anymore. I didn't dream. I don't think you do in situations like that. Just flashes, bright lights, blurry faces, sounds of lockers slamming, and the dull thud of bodies hitting tile. The second night in Roosevelt High was colder than the first, not because of the temperature, but because by then I'd seen what the school had become. I knew I wasn't the only one left alive, but the ones who had made it were either barricading themselves in or dying in the attempt. And the dead didn't rest. They moved. They waited. They learned, in a slow, broken way, how to reach the places we thought were safe. I woke up just after dawn, still wedged beneath the teacher's desk in room 207. My neck was stiff. Legs curled so tight I couldn't feel my feet at first. The fluorescent lights overhead were still buzzing softly, probably running off the school's emergency backup grid. My mouth was dry. I'd been chewing gum for the past hour just to pretend I wasn't hungry. The food was long gone. All I had left was a half-empty water bottle and the scissors I kept looped through the chest pocket of my hoodie like a badge. I knew I had to move. I'd been putting it off for hours, but time was running out. Every minute I stayed in one place was another minute the infected could find me, or another desperate survivor might try to take whatever they thought I had. My new goal was the industrial arts wing, shop class, metalworks, the old maintenance cages where they used to keep extra tools. Maybe, just maybe, there was still something usable in there, something better than a pair of scissors. To get there, I had to cross the south stairwell and make my way through the arts hallway. That part of the building was darker, built in the 70s, never updated, the kind of place that smelled like plaster, old paint, and forgotten projects. If I made it through that stretch and down the ramp corridor, I'd hit the shop rooms just beyond the auto garage. It wasn't the fastest route, but it avoided the gym entirely, and that was important. I hadn't gone near the gym since the second night. I could still hear what had happened in there. The hallway outside room 207 was clear, at least for the moment. I moved fast but quiet, hugging the lockers and pausing at intersections. The light changed as I crossed into the older wing. Fewer windows, dimmer fixtures. A classroom door was open on my right. I didn't stop, but I glanced inside. Art supplies scattered, brushes dried mid-stroke on canvases. One looked like it had been painted in blood. I kept going. When I reached the stairwell, I paused. Something was dripping nearby, slow, rhythmic, like water hitting metal. I couldn't see the source. I gripped the railing and started down, one step at a time. My shoes made no noise on the rubber treads. At the bottom, near the access door to the loading dock ramp, I saw the first body of the day. Not infected, dead. A girl, younger than me, maybe a freshman. She was curled under the stairwell like she'd tried to hide. Her arm was missing below the elbow. Her eyes were still open. I didn't stop to check her name. Past the ramp, I reached the metal shop. The doors were locked, but one of the windows was broken. Just enough space to reach through and flip the latch inside. I pushed the door open slowly, the hinges squealing even though I barely touched them. Inside, the air smelled like oil and rust. The workbenches were dusty, tools scattered everywhere, half organized in trays. A few still clamped in vices from projects abandoned 2 days ago. I started searching, fast but methodical. A utility knife, too dull. A soldering iron, useless without power. A short crowbar wedged behind the welding lockers. That was something. I yanked it free and tested the grip. It was heavier than I expected, but balanced enough to swing. I tied it to my backpack strap with a length of copper wire I found on the floor. Not ideal, but it meant I didn't have to carry it in my hands the whole time. Then I heard the door move. Not creak, not rattle, move, like someone was testing it from the outside. I froze, ducked behind one of the side benches, and waited. No footsteps followed. Just a scrape, something heavy dragging across the tile, then silence. I counted to 60, nothing. Then I stood up and moved to the exit, peeking through the window. The hallway was empty. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was the wind through the broken window frame. I stepped out into the corridor, gripping the crowbar tight, and that's when I saw it. An infected man was standing at the far end of the hallway, just standing there, swaying. He was barefoot, shirt torn open, belly hanging out like he hadn't eaten in days. His face was wrong, jaw unhinged slightly to one side, eyes blank, skin a pale waxy grey. He hadn't seen me yet. Not really, just stared in my direction with that empty, unblinking look. I backed up slowly toward the science lab door, but then something behind me clattered. Maybe a wrench I knocked loose. Maybe my backpack brushing against a stool. Whatever it was, it made sound. And that sound changed everything. The man's head jerked toward me, and then he moved. He didn't run, but he surged forward with all the weight of his body behind him. Arms up, shoulders hunched, knees stiff but charging. I turned and sprinted back through the lab, knocking over a rolling tool cabinet to slow him down. He crashed into it hard, snarling, a sound that didn't sound human. A deep, guttural wheeze, like lungs half full of water. I rounded the central bench, fumbling to get the crowbar off my pack. He kept coming, undeterred by the obstacles between us. I didn't have a plan, no technique, just instinct and fear. When he lunged over the bench, I swung, full force. The crowbar connected with the side of his face, just above the temple. It wasn't like in the movies. There was no clean crack, no dramatic fall, just a sickening thud and a spray of blood across the lockers behind him. He staggered but didn't drop. He grabbed the edge of the table, growling like something pulled from a hole in the earth. I hit him again, harder. This time, I went low, aimed for the knee. His leg buckled, and he collapsed, still reaching. He didn't cry out, didn't show pain, just kept clawing. I brought the crowbar down a third time, this time directly onto the top of his head. He stopped moving. I staggered backward, breathing fast, crowbar slick in my hands. My arms shook. I dropped to one knee, not because I was hurt, but because my body had stopped responding to commands. I sat there, staring at the thing I'd just killed. The first one. It hadn't been clean. It hadn't been brave. But it had been necessary. I didn't feel like a survivor. I felt like someone who'd just barely avoided being torn apart by something that used to be a person. After a few minutes, I stood, cleaned the crowbar with an old shop rag, and tied it back to my pack. I couldn't stay there. The sound would draw more. If any were close, they'd come. I needed a place to hide. Something better than a classroom. Somewhere they wouldn't check. I remembered the media cage above the auditorium, the projection booth. It was old and barely used, but it had a steel door and a lock. If I could reach it, I could hole up, rest, think, maybe even find an old walkie or working battery rig. I didn't know, but it was safer than staying in the shop class with a body on the floor and blood drying on my hands. I moved fast, back through the ramp corridor, up the west stairwell, and toward the auditorium mezzanine. The doors to the main hall were shut tight, but I found the side entry unlocked. The smell inside was worse. Stale air, old carpet, spilled drinks, and something underneath it all. The booth was at the top, past the AV control deck. I reached the door and tried the handle. Locked. I cursed, stepped back, and used the crowbar to wedge the latch. Took 3 hits. The third one broke it loose with a snap. Inside was small, barely enough room for 2 people. Dust coated everything. A busted projector, empty soda bottles, a metal chair. I slammed the door shut and jammed the broken latch back into the frame. I pushed the chair against it and sat down, breathing through clenched teeth. I didn't move for a while. My arms were sore from swinging the crowbar. My hands still smelled like rust and something else I didn't want to name. I stared at the black projector shell in front of me and thought about the last time I'd been in the auditorium. It was a mandatory assembly, some boring talk about digital citizenship and exam prep. That had only been 2 weeks ago. Now I was using the same booth to barricade myself from people who didn't stay dead. I remember thinking that I needed to sleep, just an hour or 2, but I didn't dare close my eyes. The noise downstairs didn't stop. Something moved every few minutes. Sometimes metal creaked. Sometimes a distant thud echoed through the old vent ducts. By late afternoon, the temperature had dropped. The sun was low enough that the windows on the west side of the building were glowing. I crept to the corner of the booth and looked through the thick glass at the quad outside. That's when I knew I had to leave. From the 3rd floor, I had a partial view of the parking lot and the bus lane behind the school. Smoke was rising in thick columns. 2, maybe 3 buses were burning. Their windows had cracked from the heat, and the twisted frames of seats inside were barely visible through the flames. But what caught my attention were the silhouettes, shadows moving behind the broken windows. They weren't passengers. Not anymore. The buses were filled with infected. Some pressed their faces to the glass as they burned. They weren't screaming. They weren't trying to escape. They just stood there, shifting, reaching, as if they didn't understand what was happening. Someone had set those buses on fire. Someone who had tried to contain them, or maybe kill them, but they were still moving. The fire hadn't worked. My stomach twisted at the sight. That was supposed to be the solution. Burn them, trap them, and it wasn't working. That meant the infected inside the building weren't going anywhere either. They didn't bleed out. They didn't weaken. Not unless you destroyed the brain, or broke them down piece by piece. This place wasn't safe anymore. It had never really been. I just convinced myself it was because I had nowhere else to go. I packed what little I had, water bottle, flashlight, scissors, crowbar, and moved toward the back of the projection booth. There was an old service ladder that connected to the catwalks above the stage. From there, I could reach the far stairwell behind the backstage curtain, then work my way toward the back exit near the loading dock. That was the plan. The descent was slow. The ladder creaked with every step. I kept my head on a swivel, checking above and below constantly. When I reached the bottom, the stage was empty. The velvet curtain had been torn from one side, and the rows of auditorium seats looked like they'd been trampled. I didn't wait. I moved along the side wall, slipped through the backstage hallway, and stepped into the corridor leading to the exit doors. That's where I found the bodies. 4 people, 2 adults, 2 students. One was a teacher I recognized, Mr. Tansey, who used to coach the school's chess team. He was on his side, back pressed against the lockers, a tourniquet tied high on one leg. His face was pale, and his eyes were closed, but there was no blood around his mouth or on his hands. He hadn't turned. Not yet. The other adult, a woman I didn't know, was lying nearby, curled like she'd died in her sleep. Her chest wasn't moving. The students were harder to look at. One had a broken arm, the other had scratches across his face and neck, but neither showed signs of reanimation. I crouched beside one and checked the wrist for a pulse. Nothing. His fingers were cold. Whatever had happened to them, it hadn't finished the job. Maybe they'd bled out. Maybe they'd taken something. Maybe they'd made a decision before they could turn. Beside the older boy's body, leaning against a locker, was something that stopped me in my tracks. A baseball bat, wrapped in old electrical wire, the kind used for school AV systems, thick, grey, and half melted at the ends. It wasn't clean. The wood had been stained dark with something dried. It looked like he'd tried to make a weapon. Not a good one, but one that sent a message. Stay back. I picked it up. It was too light, the wire loose in places, but it was better than swinging with my bare hands. I slung the crowbar back into my pack and took the bat instead. The hallway turned near the exit to the loading dock. A metal crash made me stop mid-step. I ducked behind a row of cleaning carts left in the open. Around the corner I saw movement. One of the infected, thin, long hair, school security uniform, was standing in the vestibule, half turned toward the light from the fire outside. He didn't see me. Not yet. His head twitched every few seconds, like he was trying to locate a sound that had already stopped. I watched him for nearly 2 minutes before I moved. I timed it with the sound of a distant explosion. Maybe another bus. Maybe a transformer. When the blast echoed through the building, I sprinted the last few feet and slammed the bat down across the back of the thing's head. It staggered. Not down, but off balance. I hit it again, this time across the neck. The wire tore skin, but it didn't drop. I screamed, more rage than fear, and swung a third time. The bat cracked across the back of the skull with a splintering sound. The thing collapsed against the doorframe, head twisted at an impossible angle. I stepped back, panting, bat still in my hands. I couldn't let myself feel bad about it. Not anymore. These weren't people. Not really. Not once they turned. I had to keep telling myself that. If I hesitated, even for a second, it would be me on the floor next time. Me with my jaw hanging loose. Me pressed against the glass of a burning bus, trying to understand why I couldn't die like a person should. The exit door opened with effort, jammed slightly from something outside. I pressed hard, shoved my shoulder into it, and finally forced it wide enough to slip through. The alley behind the school was thick with smoke. The wind blew the worst of it east toward the nearby tracks, but the heat clung to the pavement like fog. The buses were still burning, their charred skeletons glowing orange through the gaps in the flames. I didn't wait. I turned south and ran, ducking behind dumpsters, weaving between parked maintenance vans and broken fencing. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to keep moving. Away from the fire, away from the school, away from the thing Roosevelt High had become. The streets outside were worse than I expected. I thought I was prepared for what I'd see. But the truth is, there's no preparation for what Chicago looked like after just 2 days of collapse. Cars were stacked like wreckage from a hurricane. Some turned sideways into streetlights. Others abandoned with their doors wide open, alarms still wailing until their batteries died out. Blood was smeared across the sidewalks and painted in hand-sized prints down the glass walls of corner shops and fast food windows. No people, no police, no ambulances, just the shell of a city that had already lost the fight. I cut through the alley behind an apartment complex near Leland Avenue, sticking to the narrow spaces between buildings. It smelled like burned plastic and old grease. Trash bags were torn open across the pavement. Someone had tried to block the alley with a mattress and a broken bike frame. It didn't work. There were drag marks in the dirt, a trail of blood that stopped near a brick wall and didn't continue. I didn't want to think about what that meant. By the time I reached Milwaukee Avenue, I was running on instinct. I kept low, used every parked car and storefront sign as cover. Occasionally I'd hear something, far off, a shriek that echoed strangely, or the sound of a distant collision. But the dead weren't out in the open. Not yet. Not here. Maybe they'd already moved on. Or maybe they were waiting. I passed the Jefferson Park Blue Line station just before dusk. The gate was half closed, bent like something had crashed into it. Inside, the turnstiles were warped, and there were dark stains on the stairs leading down to the platform. A CTA train sat frozen on the track, lights still flickering inside. But I didn't go down. I remembered what it looked like underground during rush hour. All that concrete and nowhere to run. If anyone had tried to escape through the trains, they were either dead or trapped. I wasn't going to join them. Instead, I kept moving south, heading toward the edge of Portage Park. I figured if I could make it to the residential stretch near Irving Park Road, I might find a house or small store that hadn't been completely looted, somewhere I could regroup, somewhere to catch my breath. I found a small gas station near Central Avenue. Its glass doors had been smashed in, but the metal shutters had halfway rolled down. I squeezed inside. The interior was trashed, racks overturned, chips ground into the floor, the front register torn open, but the back was intact. The cooler doors were open, but some of the shelves still held bottled water and a few energy drinks. I drank one on the spot and stuffed 3 more into my bag. I grabbed 2 protein bars from behind the counter, then froze when I heard something scrape behind the bathroom door. I backed away, raising the bat in both hands. The door was cracked an inch open, no light inside. I held my breath and waited. No sound, no movement. Whatever had made the noise didn't come out. I didn't open the door, just stepped out of the store and kept moving. I'd learned that lesson in the school. Curiosity is what gets you killed. By the time I reached the edge of the park, the sky had shifted from orange to deep gray. Clouds were moving in, and the wind had changed. Somewhere in the city, another siren started and then abruptly cut off. A warning that had no one left to hear it. Streetlights flickered but never fully came on. Power was failing block by block. From one corner of the park, I saw what looked like an apartment building in flames. 3 stories tall, fully engulfed, and no one putting it out. Just glowing against the sky like a second sun. I ducked through the playground and across the baseball field, staying in the shadows. Near the dugout, I saw a man lying face down. His clothes were torn, but he wasn't moving. One of his shoes was missing, and his arm was bent the wrong way. I crept closer, bat ready, no breathing, no twitching. I nudged him once with the toe of my shoe, and when he didn't react, I kept going. Past the field was a maintenance shed, small and metal-roofed, with an old padlock half rusted on the door. I snapped it open with the bat and slid inside. The air smelled like gasoline and motor oil. Shelves held plastic tubs and broken tools. Nothing useful, but it was shelter. I sat in the corner between a stack of mulch bags and a bin of cones and listened. Across the park, I could hear movement. Slow, dragging footsteps. More than one set. Not panicked. Not fast. Just constant. Unrelenting. The kind of sound that makes your skin crawl. Not because it's loud, but because it never stops. I peeked through the slats of the metal door and saw them. 5 of them, maybe 6, crossing through the grass. One had a firefighter's jacket. One was missing an arm. Their heads turned randomly, but they didn't stop. They were searching. Maybe for noise. Maybe for anything still breathing. I didn't breathe for over a minute. They passed. Not fast. Not close. But close enough to remind me that the city was no longer mine. That sidewalks and benches and bus stops weren't neutral ground anymore. That even the things meant to help us, like ambulances, fire trucks, police barricades, were now just hollow markers of a world that had already ended. I stayed in the shed until full dark. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. My mind kept running back to the people I'd left behind. The girl under the stairwell, Mr. Rizzo, the coach who'd locked that classroom door, even the infected man in the AV hallway. He must have worked security at the school. I remembered him from assembly days, always making jokes, always watching the doors with a kind of tired patience. Now his body was cooling in the loading dock entry, his spine cracked, and his face barely recognizable from the swings I'd landed. When I looked at myself in the reflection of my phone screen later, I barely recognized me either. Dirt smudged across my cheeks, scratches on my hands, eyes red, hair matted flat to one side. A 16-year-old kid who used to worry about whether he'd pass his history quiz, or whether Jenny from 3rd period liked his hoodie. Now I was just another face trying to stay out of the jaws of something that didn't care who I was. Around midnight, the wind picked up. It carried the faint sound of helicopters. Not close. Maybe downtown, maybe farther. I climbed onto the roof of the shed, crouched low and scanned the skyline. The fire from the apartment complex had dimmed, but smoke still poured upward. I saw flashes of light in the distance, red and white, cutting across the clouds. Not lightning, not gunfire, maybe searchlights, maybe someone trying to evacuate the last of the responders. But not here, not in Portage Park. Out here, it was just me. That night, I made a new plan. I knew the streets well enough. I knew where the back alleys ran. I knew which houses had fences and which didn't. I knew where the Forest Glen rail yard was. And I knew the old bike paths that could take me east without going near the expressway. I'd make my way toward the river, toward Horner Park, maybe the suburbs beyond, anywhere that wasn't here. Because Roosevelt High had burned, because Chicago was bleeding, and because I wasn't going to wait around for someone to fix it. The world had ended in pieces, not with one giant collapse, but with 1,000 small failures no one noticed until it was too late. Phones stopped working, police stopped showing up, families disappeared, and kids like me stopped being kids overnight. I'm still alive. That counts for something. I've seen what happens when you freeze, when you hope someone else will come save you. They don't. You move, or you don't breathe. It's that simple now. I don't know who's out there. I don't know if help is real, or if all that's left is just survivors picking through the wreckage. But I'll find out. I'm heading east, bat on my shoulder, backpack tight, one foot in front of the other. Because the world didn't end in my school, and I didn't survive all that just to die on some street corner waiting for the lights to come back on. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more unsettling creepypastas. Your support keeps my channel alive. Until next time, stay quiet, stay vigilant, and trust nothing, not even the silence.